let's start at the beginning of the process, which is voter registration. And several panelists have talked about voter registration. We have our traditional outlets of door-to-door canvassing not open because of COVID-19. We have churches not open. We have students who are on campus who can't mobilize. We have voter registration and voter ID laws that have changed in different states. What do we need to do to make sure that everyone has the right to register and does register?
That's a great question. And these are very good questions that I think hopefully we remember these questions not just in the context of this pandemic, but these are the things we're thinking about in every election because these are incredibly important, especially now. I think the thing that we should all do first and foremost is make sure we ourselves are registered to vote and we have requested absentee ballots, because we don't know what the situation is going to look like in October and November. So the first thing we should do is make sure we ourselves will get to access our right to vote. The second thing we should do is, as you pointed out, churches, churches, political organizations, the normal ways in which we do get out the vote strategies, those aren't available to us. So the second thing I would recommend we do is reach out to the people we do know and we do have good relationships with, and use those person-to-person contacts to make sure our friends and family members are both registered to vote and that they can vote and that they have requested that absentee ballot. And if they don't, that they have a plan to do so. We should be asking them for more than just a commitment. We should be finding out when they're planning to request that absentee ballot, and once they've had it, when they're going to send it in. I think that making sure everyone we know has a plan is a great step forward. In terms of making sure everyone's able to get access to, the identification and the requirements they need to vote, I think the other thing we can do is just, pressure our local elected officials. And if officials at one level are not being responsive, of course we should vote them out of office. But we should also, in the meantime, be reaching out to other officials at different levels of the government. I think that very local elected officials, for instance, officials at the city and county level, aren't often contacted by their constituents. And so even just a few people reaching out to them and asking for help can prompt them to be very responsive, and they might do whatever they can, even if it's more limited than people at the statewide or federal level.
That question is pregnant with a lot of different nuance, and I think the answer that I would have now when we're facing the coronavirus is a little bit different than what I would be facing under an ordinary election. If we were facing an ordinary election, I would say, make sure you sign up with a group that goes out and registers voters. Make sure you know where you hit high traffic areas. Make sure that you're friendly and can articulate why it is that someone should register to vote. In this instance, this is going to depend upon a lot more like person-to-person contact through channels like media or over the phone. People need to be willing to help their neighbors walk through the process, which requires a great deal of patience and a good familiarity with the program. Just like you may have had to walk a colleague through how to use Zoom. During this crisis, you need to be prepared to be able to tell people this is a step that you must take in order to be able to get an application to vote, or in order to be able to register to vote, or how to get an application to register to vote. You may either need to walk them through how to do this online or how to get a paper copy and then talk them through it.
Some of the avenues that groups that traditionally do voter registration are pursuing now with the COVID pandemic is to find new ways to reach out to voters or prospective voters to make sure they register to vote through Zoom meetings or Skype meetings, which is a new platform for many of us, including voter registration groups on the ground. Still trying to communicate to voters via mail, sending mailings to them directly to encourage them to register to vote, and through public service announcements. And unfortunately, many states do not have a robust register on the same day of voting as some states do, which helps people who have either been purged from the rolls or haven't registered in time in advance of an election. But there's other ways people can register to vote through online voter registration in many states, or through traditional mail. applications as well. And some states take voter registration applications via email or fax to make it easier in some locations for some voters to register to vote. But I know that a lot of the groups that are devoting a large amount of their time generally to voter registration are having to pivot and find new ways to engage with prospective voters to encourage them to register to vote and to help them.
Because of COVID-19, I understand Stacey Abrams was saying if you had 100 people who were going to vote and you could get 75 of them to get an absentee ballot and vote by mail in whatever form is available to them in the jurisdiction in which they reside, then that would greatly reduce the pressure on the polls, which will be understaffed, as we saw in Wisconsin recently. And then you get another group of those people to find, I don't know whether some places will allow vote by mail, then in addition, you can have absentee ballots, and ultimately you can reduce the pressure on the polling places and reduce the time and the pressure and the lines and the staffing and all the things that lead people not to be able to vote.
In the midst of a pandemic where there are physical distancing requirements, in order to keep everybody safe, we need to lean on a vote by mail process. We need to make it work for everybody, which means relying on the lessons learned from states that use it primarily. We do have a couple of states, or a few states in this country that almost entirely vote by mail. And they didn't get there overnight. They got there over years of practice, and they're refining their election processes. But we don't have to start from scratch either. We can take what states already do and look at what states that do, states that have been doing it for a long time, and figure out what lessons are applicable. And some of those things include making sure that everybody understands the relevant deadlines, making sure that there's not more hoops than you need to file over it, making sure that there are fail-safes in case things go wrong, making sure that the voter registration lists are already clean and accurate, up to date, make sure that you have good ballot counting procedures, and making sure that you have security measures in place so that nobody can scream fraud afterwards.
Vote by mail does exist in a fair amount of the states now. Unfortunately, the rules pertaining to vote by mail vary widely depending upon the state. Some states, such as Georgia, require voters to apply for an absentee ballot, and then when they submit the absentee ballot, there's a signature match requirement where the state examines whether the signature on the ballot envelope matches the voter signature that's on file with the Secretary of State's office. And in many cases, people have registered to vote many, many years before an election. So it's unlikely that their signature is going to exactly match the card that they submitted when they registered to vote. So if that occurs now in this COVID pandemic era, voters have to submit an affidavit in writing, as well as identification documents to prove that they were actually the person that submitted that vote by mail ballot. And we're concerned that people will have trouble submitting those forms if they don't have access to the internet, for example, or a computer or printer at home, or don't have the ability to submit those materials to their election office via email or fax. So that's something we're trying to address with our coalition members on the ground to try and help voters who face problems submitting those documents to be able to vote absentee. And we've seen in other states too that some states like Florida do have more generous opportunities for voting by mail, including on election day, where a voter, if they can't get to the polls because of the COVID pandemic, can enlist a relative to obtain the ballot from the election office on election day, bring it to the voter, have the voter choose their candidates on the ballot and give the ballot back to their relative to deliver to the election officials. And that's a handy option for people in Florida who were affected by the COVID pandemic. However, other states have deadlines where you have to submit the ballot in advance of the election or have it postmarked by election day, and don't offer those opportunities to collect and pick up the ballot and bring it back on election day. So we're encouraging folks to really look at what the available options are in the state and make a plan for voting given the current COVID situation, to make sure that they know what the deadlines are, know what they need to do to submit a vote by mail ballot if that's available in their states, and what they need to watch out for in the event there's a signature match requirement similar to what they have in Georgia, and find out that their signature doesn't match and what they need to do to cure that mismatch. One of the other issues to be concerned about with vote by mail, although vote by mail is a great help to many, many voters across the country, is that it doesn't help everyone. For example, voters with disabilities who are unable to write on a ballot, hand-marked ballot, have to vote on machines often in order to be able to exercise their right to vote, including in privacy, where they don't have to rely on a family member or neighbor or friend to help them fill out a handwritten ballot. In addition, there are many people in the country who are housing insecure, who don't have a home address, where they can't receive an absentee ballot by mail. And in many jurisdictions, you have to receive the ballot by mail. So those individuals have to often rely on voting in person in order to cast a ballot. So when you're talking about vote by mail, there has to be a consideration for people who cannot vote by mail for those reasons, so that there are opportunities for them to participate in the election.
So it depends by state. Some states, for instance, Washington state already does almost all of its elections, really most of them, by vote by mail already. So this does vary, but oftentimes, and I would expect in almost all cases, if a state does not do vote by mail already, it would require a legislative change. So it would require coordination and collaboration between both the governors in each state and their respective legislatures. Unfortunately, this is where it's going to be a problem for swing states like my home state of Wisconsin, and that many of the swing states in the Midwest and elsewhere have split legislatures and governors, so they're not represented by the same party. And so we do risk running into situations where certain politicians seeking to take advantage of the pandemic may attempt to, prevent vote by mail. And that's all the more reason why we should be planning now and planning ahead in case there's not a universal mandate for vote by mail.